Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And one of the real high spots about the NATO summit for me was seeing Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and seeing her joy at finally having her husband released. And I wonder, Ms. Dubakova, if you think there was any particular significance to Lukashenko releasing those prisoners. And my understanding, based on what we've been able to determine, is that there was nothing promised to him in that prisoner release except for a public presentation with the prisoners. So can you tell us anything about that and what you think it means?
Again, as I said in my opening remarks, I'm really grateful to the United States and to President Donald Trump for this leadership. I think it's really important and it saves lives, as we see. And that also gave a lot of hope to the movement, to the democratic movement of Belarus. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is now with Sergei Tikhanovsky in Poland, and they're actually meeting with President Duda and later with Minister Radosław-Sikorski, who really supported Sergei while he was in prison. And then they actually have a rally when people would appear and would protest. So I think that's also significant that people can unite once again. That became such a hopeful and emotional moment for everyone. When it comes to concessions and what Alexander Lukashenko might have got from it, of course, we don't have these details at this point, and I think he's so desperate to get out of isolation that this meeting, this handshake and these hugs that he was presented with, that was enough. The question is what he would need next to release more prisoners. And I believe that pressure here is important because that's, again, the tool and leverage over Lukashenko. He wants sanctions to be lifted, and that's something where we can negotiate with him regarding this. So that's crucial. And it's also important not to legitimize Lukashenko before, of course, he gives concessions and all political prisoners are released and repression stops.
I certainly agree with that. There was a great deal of interest at the summit with all the players that we met with about the status of the Graham-Blumenthal sanctions legislation and the importance of passing that to put pressure on Russia. Can each of you speak to whether you think that would be important for us to do and whether that might help to move Russia?
Generally, we don't comment on ongoing legislation, but I will say that any pressure on the Russian regime, on President Putin and his oligarchs and cronies is generally positive for a couple of reasons. One, for demonstrating and exercising leverage and the ability for the United States to use that leverage in service of a particular end. But second, I think it's also a real symbol of the United States resolve, that the United States continues to be very concerned about this, that we're united, and that there are policies that are in place and there are efforts being made to do something about that. And I think that sends a very powerful signal.
So generally speaking, targeted sanctions that tries to limit or curtail the ability of an autocratic elite.
Yeah, maybe I should be clear about what's in this bill. This is secondary sanctions on those countries who would do business with.
Right. Yeah, so I was leading that threat, absolutely. So generally speaking, sanctions do serve as a specific important instrument of leverage. So we begin, there's a literature on targeted sanctions, and then there's a lot of literature on secondary sanctions. These work as mechanisms of curtailing the ability of given countries such as Russia to basically proceed with whatever the game plan is. And so it offers the United States and its allies a toolkit that could be utilized against Putin's regime. It's not a silver bullet, but
no, I understand that.
Of course, but in of itself, it does offer us an important mechanism of leverage in curtailing some of their capabilities.
Thank you. Do you agree with that?
I certainly agree that this is important. Belarus became a loophole for Russia. Russia is avoiding sanctions thanks to Belarus, thanks to the regime. And Belarus is also collaborating a lot now with China and Iran. There was even a project to build a production site for Iranian drones in Belarus, so that's one of the examples how this collaboration looks like. China has become the second trade partner of Belarus. That's now around 10% of trade that goes to China, but that's still significant because, again, that's the second trade partner. And of course, when it comes to banks, Russia is also avoiding sanctions via Belarus through banks. So I think all of this would be really important to tackle these loopholes, because what the regime is striving on is this kind of loopholes where it can still do their businesses. And there have been also numerous examples of this.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, can I raise one other issue?
Yes, ma'am.
Last week in the Foreign Relations Committee, we had several experts testifying in advance of the NATO summit. It was on NATO. And they both made a point that I think is sometimes overlooked, and that is 2 points, actually. One is that Russia is militarizing in a way that goes beyond their capability or their capacity and need to address the war in Ukraine. And they're doing it with a very deliberate intent to, after Ukraine, attack another NATO country. The second point they made was that it is not in America or Europe's interest to lose Ukraine as an ally, because they have the biggest army in Europe, they have the most technologically equipped fighting force in Europe, and to allow that army and that capacity to go into the Russian orbit would be a huge detriment both to the NATO alliance and to the United States. Again, is that something that you all would say is an analysis that you could agree with?
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. I absolutely agree with that. I think it's very clear that Russia, although it has referred to its war footing as partial mobilization, that by any kind of conventional measure that it is a total war footing. The mobilization of vast sectors of the economy and the impressing of hundreds of thousands of people into military service every year, and also other means of producing the material and the means of war making, not just on Ukraine, but broader aggression in Europe. I think there's a number of assessments that have been made by our allies in Europe, including intelligence chiefs, saying that they believe that Russia's rather impressive, I should say, powers of regeneration would likely be able to be used against a NATO state within 5 to 10 years. And so that's something I think we all have to be thinking about when we're looking at the cost of a bad peace, because what we have in Ukraine is a country that has shown itself to be battle-tested, militarily potent, and a society that is resilient and strong and has withstood, I think, something that is unimaginable, and yet has in many cases bested the Russians with meager support when it comes down to it from the world. So in that case, in that sense, I think that there's a really strong case to want to work with the Ukrainians and to try and do everything we can to ensure that Russian aggression does not spread elsewhere in Europe.
Thank you. I know I'm out of time. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.